Everyone, it's Emily Fox. Today's video is going to be the last video in this series where I was going back through all the 400 books that I've read since I started Booktube, and I let you know which ones were the worst ones. I'll link those videos down below. I also did the best one in each genre, and today we're doing the best of the best, aka la crème de la crème. We're going back and talking about the best ones in my two main genres, which are adult and fantasy and sci-fi. And I was tempting to keep it to a reasonable number, so we're doing a top 8 with 6 special mentions. Let's start with the Sister Trilogy by Mark Lawrence. I fell in love so hard with this one, the first book being Red Sister. I'm always recommending it because first off, it has one of my favorite premises, which is a magical school. I've been describing it as badass magical nuns fighting, which you're following the same characters for like years and years and years, which I thought was really interesting. You're actually following mainly female characters, and they're actually interesting and complex. And I feel like one of my biggest pet peeves in a lot of fantasy series or books really is that the female characters are either very much caricature stereotypes, like even when they're strong, they're still like for some reason dainty and pretty because you need to, and it's not the case in here, which was just really fantastic. The magic system is really interesting. There are like 4 different types, and one of them actually being people being really strong and tall, which so the girls are training in this magical school run by nuns, and they're actually getting muscular, which was, isn't it sad that I found that refreshing? But what I really enjoy is that there are so many like relationship between the characters that are either positive or negative really. And there is a chosen one type of story in there, but you don't know who it is. And I really also enjoyed that the world is actually kind of apocalyptic. Like the sun is becoming weaker and weaker, and they're using some type of moon to like warm up a specific place on the planet. But obviously with time, ice is becoming like closer and closer and people are being stuck. So obviously wars, and I'm explaining this very, very badly, but I absolutely adored this. I only complained about the third book being kind of short because I wanted more about the whole part that I just explained. And there is a companion series that just came out. The first book is out. It's going to be one of my next reads, so I cannot wait to read more. The book is called The Girl and the Stars, so definitely keep an eye out for my review on that one, but I just adore this. I highly recommend people to check it out. It is pretty gruesome, just be warned if you are pretty sensitive, but I adored it. And also, I'm not a fan of romance, and I know a lot of you feel the same, so just warning, whenever it is the case, I try to, tell you. Not really a problem here. There are some love interests, but it's a very slow burn thing. Nothing really happens. There's like a short story between book 2 and 3, and it's only when things start really happening, so you're good. Nobody's going to be surprised about me mentioning some Brandon Sanderson books because he's definitely one of my favorite authors. He's definitely very well known in fantasy world, really. But I'm always asked which book should I start by him, and everyone is always mentioning certain ones, but I tend to recommend Warbreaker because it is a standalone for now, and it is available for free as a PDF on his website. So, if you just want to pick it up for free, definitely recommend doing it that way. For anyone that doesn't know, Brandon Sanderson is really well known for his world building and magic system and his endings, really. Those are like his forte, and definitely the case here. In this world, people use colors to use magic, and there are gods actually in here too, which I don't want to explain too much because I feel like if you go into it pretty blind, you're going to enjoy it more. But there's also a talking sword, which for some reason I found very entertaining. I just overall really enjoy that one. Again, it's a standalone, so I feel like it's pretty easy commitment. You can easily go through this and decide if his style of books is for you or not. It is one of the first books actually that I've read by him and truly enjoyed it. Definitely recommend it. Again, it isn't my best of the best, so it says a lot. There is going to be 1 or 2 more books, but for now it's stand on its own really, really well, so definitely don't have to worry about that. But yes, highly recommend it. Again, I'm not saying too much because I do think that one is better if you don't know too much. However, another book series by him that you hear a lot of people talk about is the Mistborn trilogy, which again, one of the first books that I've read by him. This one, I will tell you a lot more. It is a trilogy, so obviously it's more commitment. That's why I like when people say to start with this one. I don't disagree, it's just that it's 3 books and they're pretty chunky, so that's why I tend to recommend a standalone instead. But in this world, you're following Vin. I'm so bad with names. And in this world, what's interesting, once again, magic system is based on metals and it's very, very strict. So like people that are able to use a specific power have to ingest that metal to burn it. and they can only do that specific thing with it, which I thought was really interesting to just see how it was going to be used throughout the book. And usually people can only use one, but then you have the Mistborns who can use all of them, so you can kind of see how, since it's more rare, these people would be very powerful. And it's essentially a heist. A group of thieves basically trying to overthrow the empire. That's at least the story for the first book, and it was mind-blowing. Really enjoyed it. In the series, you also have one of my favorite characters of all time, Sazed, which, so wholesome, love him. And I know that people always mention the ending of the last book, which obviously spoiler-free, but his endings are always like, they call it the Sanderson avalanche or something, because pieces just fall into place. And like, especially in this series, the last book, I didn't love everything in the last ending, but it's just so mind-blowing. Like, you can't see where it's going to go. Like, you can't imagine the whole complexity of the world, and it's just something to experience, really. Like, even if you don't love it, I definitely feel like you should read the whole thing just to get to that point, because I was so impressed, really, that made me want to read pretty much every single book that he will ever write, because wow, very, very impressive. Also, no real romance in here because it's not something that he really does, which I appreciate. And yeah, definitely recommend Brandon Sanderson in general, but these two books are definitely my favorites so far by him. I know that people are going to be like, oh, why is there no, like, The Way of Kings here? I know, I'm currently reading it, so it couldn't be included because it won't be, you know, one part of the first 400 books that I've read on Booktube, so maybe in part 2 eventually, but so far, these are my two favorites by him, at least that are adult fantasy. Last book in the fantasy section that is in the recommendation section. Nevernight by J. Kristoff. I feel like this is probably going to be the most controversial one. I feel like people either love it or hate it. I went into it pretty blind, only knowing that people raved about it a lot. And I ended up really enjoying it. First off, again, one of my favorites, Magical School. You're following Mia. So bad with names. And it's essentially a revenge story. Her family is assassinated and she wants to get revenge, and in order to do that she goes to an assassin school, which, wow, are things very intense there, and she learns to fight poison, stealing, and she also have specific magical powers that not everyone has, which is also very interesting, and you don't really know where that's gonna go, but you know, worth the read for sure. I think the main complaint for everyone is the writing style. It's very flowery. Usually it's not really my cup of tea, but I did really enjoy that one, except for the first chapter. I'm always saying, just skip the first chapter, pretend it doesn't exist. There are a ton, and I mean a ton, of footnotes, like literally every page. Personally, I really enjoy them. You get used to reading them, unless you're listening to the audiobook, then it's just automatically mentioned, so you don't really notice. But I thought it brought a lot to story, like the world building, but also one thing that is important is the narrator. You don't know who it is, at least in the first book, and it just shows a lot of personality, and you're just left wondering what's going to happen with that. And I won't say more because obviously spoilers, but that was fun. So she's trying to get the skills, be accepted into the Red Church to become a full-fledged assassin and then be able to murder the 3 most powerful men in this world. So a lot of political intrigue, a lot of people dying left and right, and enjoyed it a lot. Ooh, mentioning again, there is some romance. There's about like 2 sex scenes-ish per book, so just be aware. They're not too bad, and it's not taking too much of the story. I feel like sometimes like the book is sold as a fantasy, but it turns out it's mostly a romance. I didn't feel that with that, so now you know. Now let's go to sci-fi. I adore sci-fi, and the 4 main ones that I'm naming now are all first contact with aliens. Nobody's surprised. The first one I think is going to be the one that the most people enjoy, and it is Children of Time by Adrian Tchaikovsky. This was so not what I expected. You're following the remnant of humanity trying to find an habitable planet, and they go to this planet where an experiment was done but didn't go as planned. Humanity sent a monkey with a serum that was supposed to accelerate the evolution. Unfortunately, the monkeys didn't make it to the planet, but the serum did, and you're stuck with giant intelligent spiders, which, if you don't like spiders, definitely skip this book. But you go back and forth each chapter between the humans and then the spiders, and you see them evolve and become, you know, a full-fledged society. And you're just not sure who you're rooting for at the end. And the ending was super mind-blowing, so not what I expected. I really, really adored it. And there is a second book that I'm supposed to be reading any day now. I'm making fun of myself because I've been saying that every day for a year. But even on its own, actually, it's a pretty good standalone. I loved it, definitely recommend it. You just don't know what to expect, but it's totally worth it. The next book is probably the only really funny book in here, and it's not that funny, it's just the beginning, and obviously humor is very hit and miss. You're either gonna agree or completely disagree with me, but The Humans by Matt Egg. In this book, you're following an alien that is sent to Earth basically as a punishment. He has to kill this man who discovered this math equation that aliens basically think we are not ready for. So he has to kill that person and kill anyone that knows about it. And the alien doesn't know anything about humans, so obviously it starts pretty funny because of that. But he kind of has to learn what it is to be human, so it obviously becomes a little bit more serious and a little bit more philosophical by the end of the story. There's also a dog in here. I mentioned that because the other cover, the prettier cover, has a dog on it, and it's not used only to make you cry. You know, I feel like whenever there's a dog in a book, they always kill it just to make you cry. It's not, you're not manipulated that way in this one. I will leave it at that because I feel like, again, it's more of a character-driven story, so there's not that much more to add, but I personally really enjoyed it. Next, I really wanted to mention Spin by Robert Charles Wilson. This one really took me by surprise. It kind of looked old, but it's been published in 2005, but for some reason it gave me like 80s vibe or something. But I will not mention all the twists because I feel like a few of the things that happened here blew my mind. So again, I will keep it as simple as possible, but just give you a little something just to intrigue you. You're following three main characters. Two are a set of twin and then like a best friend-ish. And one day they're looking at the stars and they just disappear, and obviously this event will affect them through their whole lives. They're gonna react basically completely differently, and they'll discover that it's basically a shield around the planet, and time happens way faster outside of this shield. So for humanity, like 30 years happen when it's like billions of years outside of it, and obviously the sun, there's a expiration date. So they start worrying what's going to happen to humanity whenever, you know, the shield reopens or if the sun is not there anymore. And I'm gonna leave it at that because, again, it's also pretty character driven. The timeline is not linear, so it can get a little confusing, but I personally really enjoyed it and I highly recommend it. There are one or two more books actually that I have yet to pick up because, again, so far on its own it kind of stands well, and I feel like the reviews weren't super positive for the next one, so I'm kind of scared it's going to change my mind. But I do recommend it. I know some of you did check it out and enjoyed it, so happy to hear it. The next one is probably going to be the most controversial, but I expect it. The Baro by Mary Doria Russell. I have been calling this A Little Life of First Contact with Aliens. If you've read A Little Life, you will understand that things get very tragic very fast and you just feel a lot for the characters. This one is very different from anything else that I've read because even though it is once again a first contact with aliens, humanity hear that sound coming from this planet and they want to send obviously a team to explore, but the only people that have the money and the means to go very fast is a religious organization, which first time that I read a book with that type of team where like religious people don't want to like kill the aliens. That was different. So there's only like a priest that goes with the whole team, and you learn, again, there's like 3 timelines, and in one of them, the present time, he's coming back completely alone. Everyone else died during that trip, and he's completely traumatized. He doesn't want to explain what happened, and you're just really left throughout the whole story wondering what happened, trying to find the explanation, because he completely changed, and he's currently not sure if he still believes. And it's more about like anthropology, like you're meeting the aliens, trying to understand how they function in their society. And yeah, again, I'm gonna leave it at that. It's just a very character-driven story once again. I thought the writing was beautiful. I did enjoy the characters. It won't be for everyone because once again, but I personally really enjoyed it and do recommend it. Now let's go to my 6 special recommendations because why not? The first one I really wanted to mention is the 5th season by N.K. Jemisin. Actually, the series is called the Broken Earth Trilogy. This has to be the most unique, and I mean unique, fantasy sci-fi. It's kind of in between really, because once again, it is like a apocalyptic kind of world. It's very, very complex. The writing is super strange. It starts, there's a lot of like second person, which is really strange to read. It took me a while to get used to it, not gonna lie. And like even like get into the story took me a little while, but great representation. The magical powers are really, really interesting. And again, the world building, it's just so strange. but in a really good way. For some reason, actually, the moon is also a thing in this book. I'm realizing. Like, I'm finding some similarities between, like, I feel like Red Sister and Nevernight have things in common, and I feel like Red Sister and the 5th season have stuff in common too. I'm not even sure what else to add. Just read it, really. Last special recommendation for fantasy, I had to mention the Puppy War. Once again, actually begins with a magical school. Technically, it's more a military school, but then some people have magic, so I'm counting it. Again, one of my favorite premises. But I really enjoyed the magic system. Once again, it's based on gods. The gods are actually not like a positive thing, which is refreshing, was interesting to see. I do want to mention trigger warnings. I'm sure you can look up the whole list online, but definitely mention that war, so obviously a ton of horrible stuff happens. I personally enjoy the main character. She's very different from a lot of the classical, you know, female characters. And she's definitely herself and not afraid to just do what it takes to make it. I did read book 2 and book 3 is coming out at the end of the year, I think, so I will be picking that up as soon as it's out. And I need to know, what I liked is that between book 1 and book 2, the world just becomes bigger and bigger, and like the political intrigues start becoming more and more interesting. And I'm very intrigued what's gonna happen with that last book. So definitely would check it out if that's something you want to try. Now for more special recommendations for sci-fi, let me start with The Martian. I had to include it. I feel like it's such an easy book, if you haven't seen a movie especially, or whenever people are like, oh, you know, I want to get back into reading, but I don't know what to pick up, The Martian. It's something you just can't put down, and it literally starts, I think, like, I'm fucked. Like, that's literally the first sentence. So it really grabs you from the beginning. I personally thought it was funny, and it made me realize that I really enjoy books where someone has to use their intelligence to survive in space, which basically this man is left on Mars by accident, and he has to survive until people come and help him. I highly recommend also the audiobook because it's one of the best ones that I've ever listened to. It's just really funny and engaging and interesting, and I feel like everyone knows about it, but still needed to recommend it because it's awesome. The Long Way to Small Angry Planet by Becky Chambers. This was included in my Beginner's Guide to Sci-Fi. I have 2 videos like that if you're interested, if you're looking for more, but this is just so unique. It is one of the most wholesome book I've ever read, especially as a sci-fi. It's not something you see often. It's a very character-driven also sci-fi, which is not something you see often, although I've been mentioning a few in here. You're following your crew in a spaceship that are, you know, going on a mission, but it's more about the different aliens. I loved how much time the author spent thinking about different kind of aliens and how their society would work, and it's more about love, trust, and family really than like anything else. And it's just, if you usually like, you know, contemporaries and you're wanting to get into sci-fi, it's definitely the book that I usually recommend. There are 3 books in this series, although they're more like companion novels really, but I would highly recommend you check out that book if that's something that you're looking for, like a pick-me-up, something that will make you laugh and cry, that's very, again, wholesome. I feel like right now we could all use a little bit of that, so this was bomb. I definitely recommend it. Oh wait, by the way, a 4th book is going to come out next year. I just noticed that today, so I'm very happy. I needed to mention Vengeful by V. Schwab. Technically, this is the 2nd book in what used to be a duology, but now there's a 3rd book coming out, so rejoice. This is actually about superheroes or superpowers, which is usually not something I like at all. But if you want to read this, you do have to read the 1st book, which is Vicious. You're following the story of 2 friends that met in university, and they found a way to develop superpowers, but instead of becoming superheroes, they become supervillains, and they just fight each other, which the 1st book was good. But the 2nd book, though, I absolutely adored. Obviously, the superpowers are really interesting. Everyone has like a very different, unique one due to certain things that I will not reveal. But in book 2, you're introduced to Marcella, and she's my favorite villain of all time. She's just too relatable for comfort, really. But another thing I really enjoy is how short the chapters are. I feel like it just kept me very, very engaged. But in the 2nd book, I feel like you get more background between the 2 friends from, you know, again, the 1st book at the beginning. And it was just very interesting, and I just couldn't put it down. I really, really enjoyed it. So if you are looking for a book about superheroes / supervillains, definitely would recommend this now trilogy. Last but not least, I debated including this book / the first 2 books that I've read from the trilogy, but I just need to mention it because the concepts are just so interesting, even though I have quite a few issues with some of the characters. The 3-body problem, I have very mixed feelings about this book and the 2nd book, which is The Dark Forest. I feel like for the first 2 books, because I've yet to read the third one, it's definitely something that I will be reading ASAP. The first half of the book is always super confusing and the female characters kind of suck, but the ending every time just manages to make me okay to tolerate the rest, because the concept though, once again, it's a first contact with aliens, we're all shocked. But in this one, literally the first book, it starts with the alien trying to find a different planet to go and survive, because their planet, they're having a bunch of issues, so they're trying to come to us because they have heard us. And humanity is not sure if they're going to be friendly or not. They're having to prepare themselves, and there's a group of people, what are they called? I'm so bad with names. There are just a few individuals that are basically trying to find a way to prepare for it without mentioning it to anyone. It was also very different from anything else that I've read because it starts during the China's Cultural Revolution. Even if you are struggling a little bit in the beginning with those books, I definitely recommend pushing through, because if you love very science-heavy ones, because they're very, very science-heavy, they're just super mind-blowing. Like, I can't say anything without spoiling it. Just, if you love science-heavy sci-fi books, you need to read these. You just do. I can't wait actually to finish the third book. It's one of my next read for sure. So out of the first 400 books that I've read on Booktube, these are the best ones in the adult sci-fi and fantasy categories. Once again, I will link down below the ones that I have done videos for, the worst of the worst, and then the one that is like my favorite one in each genre that weren't, you know, these 2. I will also link some more recommendation videos in different categories, or like if it's very specific ones like Beginner's Guide that I mentioned for sci-fi. I hope you enjoyed this series. Thumbs up, subscribe. Let me know if there's anything else you would like to see. I can't wait to read more books to be able to do, you know, a part 2. I will actually put more videos on the screen that I recommend you check out, and I shall see you in my next video very soon. Bye.